28 years ago, this week, I fled my home country, Bhutan, to save my life, leaving behind my wife and our 2-year-old daughter, never knowing I would ever see them again. And here I am today, having not only survived the years that followed, but speaking as a global citizen to what I truly see a global audience, given the extensive reach of the internet. Thank you, Australia. Thank you, Michelle and G, for inviting me to this session and to share my journey. And also, thank you all for joining this session. As I'm speaking from Australia, we have the tradition of acknowledging the land on which we meet. And Jody has done that already. And I believe it extends across continents today. And pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. As a practitioner of asset-based community development, I often get asked if ABCD principles can be applied in working with refugees and people seeking asylum. He knows very well that I eat, sleep, and relax with this princess called strength-based approach. And she, which is largely guided by ABCD principles. And she has asked me to talk about it today. So thank you very much, Jean. Now, as a former refugee and the experience of having to seek asylum, I would like to do this by sharing my own journey of living a prestigious government job, fleeing the country, volunteering in refugee camps in Nepal for the next 6 years, and my life in this beautiful country. And leave you all with some guiding principles on strength-based approach that I have sort of developed along the way. Now, to provide some context, I'd like to take you all back to 1950, the year that United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was established. It was established to take care of that 1 million or so people displaced after World War II. And it started with a budget of about 300,000 US. Now, 70 years later, there are over 70 million possibly displaced people around the world. There are over 25 million refugees. And the UNHCR budget has skyrocketed to close to $9 billion. Now, while we pride in, generally pride in development, economic growth, this reflects a growth in atrocities. This reflects a growth in human sufferings. This is clearly not acceptable and certainly needs an alternative approach. And among others, I believe ABCD could play an important role in this. How do these numbers keep increasing? During the early 90s, the government of Bhutan adopted a policy of ethnic cleansing, resulting in the eviction of 1/7 of the country's population. That's over 100,000 people. Personally, as you can see in the corner, from representing the government at the UN organized World Administrative Radio Conference in Spain a few months earlier, I too landed as a refugee in Nepal in April 1992. Truckloads of people were arriving in eastern Nepal every single day seeking asylum. And they had nowhere to go but to initially start camping along a riverbank and fend for themselves. Amongst the refugees were mothers with newborn babies, the elderly, and the sick who needed immediate help and attention. Amongst them, there are also a large number of former civil servants and highly skilled professionals such as doctors, engineers, and teachers, as well as technicians and tradies, including carpenters, masons, and so on. Thinking of my refugee life, I'm always reminded of Dr. Bampa Rai, one of the senior most surgeons in Bhutan before he fled the country. Rather than telling people what to do, he showed us what to do. He was literally working 24 hours to save lives, but was also part of the broader discussion on how to respond to the situation in a more holistic way. Dr. Rai, as I fondly call him Bambadaju, along with other health professionals, volunteered to take care of the sick in whatever way they could. Teachers took the lead in education, and we started the tree schools, running classes under trees in the open air. As you can see on the top of the screen, those were our first schools that we ran under trees. The carpenters, the masons, and other tradies assisted in constructing the huts to live. As you can see at the bottom, they were at a later stage and they look really nice, but initially it wasn't that good. As for me, with nothing much to do for a telecommunications engineer, I pursued my passion by volunteering to help with the education of refugee children and advocacy, including the publication of a human rights newsletter. We were then in a major crisis situation in every way, but we could not live in a crisis for too long. And to change that, each of us had to do something about it. And we had to adapt to the new normal. Sharing and caring became the new norm. And the new normal was primarily driven by relationships. I still remember my mango being cut into 10 pieces and shared between two families. And if we didn't have enough food to eat, we would have brunch, combine the breakfast with lunch. Now, talking about adjusting with the new normal, even during those challenging times, I remember the audacity of a young boy from within the camp to dream really big and reach for the stars. Prakash Suberi had just completed year 12, and he wanted to be a doctor so that he could help the people in the camp. The courage of this young boy not only to dream big, but to share his dream and make it happen has in many ways shaped my own life and inspired me to do what I do today, working with a lot of refugees and migrants and motivate them to do what they're capable of doing. Now, I find the situation that we're going through now very similar. COVID-19 has taken away our freedom of movement. It has taken away freedom of gathering together. But we haven't really lost our capacity to love and care for each other and to focus on what we can do, what each of us can do. This may be a time to help nurture the dreams of those young Prakash Suberis of the world. Now, When I fled Bhutan, I left behind everything but my knowledge. Having experienced the value of education, I too dared to dream to do an MBA while living as a refugee. I came to Australia in 1998 and turned my dream into reality by graduating with an MBA from the University of Technology in Sydney. Now, since the resettlement of Bhutanese refugees started in 2008, as the founding president of the Association of Bhutanese in Australia, Sydney, I have been actively volunteering to assist the fellow Bhutanese to settle down smoothly in the country. The slide may not be very clear. I'm not sure how clear it is, but basically what we have done is adopted a bottom-up holistic approach to refugee settlement, tapping into the strengths and assets from within the community and working collaboratively with service providers. It's an inside-out process, and the agenda is driven by the community. And Dee is a testimony to this because she has conducted some workshops and seminars for us. I feel really proud to share that within a very relatively short span of time, the community in Sydney has achieved significantly with very high level of education, training, and employment. And with over 60% of families having bought their own homes within 5 to 6 years of their settlement arrival in the country. Now, while I've been on this journey to drive a shift in refugee settlement from a need-based approach to a strength-based approach, I was very fortunate to be selected as one of the inaugural Westpac Social Change Fellows, and I had the opportunity to travel the world to research on refugee settlement. What an amazing country we are in. Westpac Bank wants to back people who have the drive to make a difference and is giving away 100 scholarships and fellowships every year forever. And as part of the fellowship, I set out to find best practice in refugee settlement. However, after months of the studies, I found that it was about valuing and nurturing the local rather than a best practice that can be applied across the board. And instead, I came up with some guiding principles, which have been published in a report titled Changing the Debate on Refugees from Sharing the Burden to Sharing the Opportunity. And I'll quickly run through them now. To start with, I really see the need to redefine refugees with their strengths and assets, not just asking what they need. Universally, the word refugee evokes a level of sympathy. While this helps to draw attention for necessary assistance in the initial survival phase, this often forms a barrier to better understanding the strengths that refugees bring to the settlement countries, as well as their socioeconomic and other contributions after they settle. What I find is defining refugees by their strengths and passions is future-oriented and can be very inspiring. Whereas by defining this with their struggle is dwelling on the past and can be very disempowering. In terms of settlement, we need a strength-based, holistic approach to refugee settlement. Currently, it's predominantly a need-based approach where we identify the needs and try to meet those needs. And it has the unintended consequences of dependency. Thirdly, what I found was gross underutilization of people with lived refugee experience. And this extends across other areas as well. You talk about homelessness. People, the people with lived experience are not consulted. You talk about disability. People with disability are not really consulted in making decisions as to the policy making or you know services. So I think this is an area engaging people with lived experience in at all aspects of refugee issue, including national and global refugee policy, service design and delivery, as well as research, would make a significant contribution in this space. And the next one is, of course, without saying that we really need to work collaboratively. Because of the current funding model, there is very little incentive for service providers to engage with communities. A collaborative approach will help drive community engagement and much better settlement outcomes. And they're more sustainable as well. And finally, I really want to touch on this because when you talk about settlement, we always look at the external aspects, the physical aspects of it. But we don't give due consideration to the internal or the mental aspects. And what do I mean by mental aspects? Now, the physical aspects are the critical supports, which I don't want to go in detail, but I just want to touch on the mental aspects. Firstly, it's the mindset. What's your mental disposition? How are you feeling? If we let our feelings on autopilot, on the injustices that we have experienced, it may continue to affect us negatively. Good feelings harness the force of love, the power to do everything good in life. Secondly, it's acceptance, accepting the reality. What has happened to you has happened, cannot do anything. If you can accept that and move on, it really helps. It wasn't by choice that I became a refugee, but I have to accept it and move forward. You may be missing many things in many memories from back home, but perhaps this is an opportunity to explore new opportunities that you have never dreamt of before. Acceptance really helps you to move forward. Thirdly, and most importantly, the sense of gratitude. How grateful are we for what we had in the past? How grateful are we for what we have today? And how grateful are we for what you're expecting about what you're going to have in the future? I really find that gratitude is the key to happiness. It's actually the insurance for happiness, if you really want an insurance. Now, before I sort of conclude, I just want to touch on some guiding principles that I've sort of developed, generally in working in this space for the last 28 years or so. Over the past 28 years of my volunteer work across communities, I've learned that every individual, whatever the situation may be, is endowed with inherent strengths and assets. As a community and as a society, we really need to help create an environment where everyone can be engaged and contribute by utilizing these assets. Every person has capacities, abilities, and gifts. The other thing I always look at now is everything I do, I always look at, are we empowering or creating dependency? Whether I sit on a board table or whether I'm helping one-on-one, this is top of my mind because oftentimes we help people and then make them more dependent. I just want to very quickly share the experience I had with my dad. When my dad arrived in Australia, he was 80 years old. And we used to go out for a drive very often. And when he got into the car, I used to tie his seatbelt and off we go. But one day I thought, what if D sees him on the street and gives him a lift? And he would expect D to tie his seatbelt. I thought, I then told him, Dad, can you tie a seatbelt? And he tried and he couldn't because he's a severe torture victim and he can't turn around much. And he said he couldn't. I held his hand and tried to push it, showed him how to do it. And he tried for a while, it didn't go through. So he said he couldn't. Then we tried a few times. And one day, when we were going through the same exercise, I happened to look at him when he was doing it. And when it clicked, I could see the spark on his face, as if he had landed on the moon. He could tie his own seatbelt. And I thought, wow, I would never do this to anybody anymore again, because, when I was tying his seatbelt, I was taking away his smile. And I wanted him to smile when, ties the seatbelt. When it clicks, it's been 10, 11 years now. I look at his face whenever he goes click, I can see that little spark comes up from time to time, even now. So he thinks a level of satisfaction. He thinks, wow, he has done it. So I think every time I do anything, whether it's a big project coming on a board table or anything I do personally to help somebody, am I actually helping this person and making that person dependent, or am I empowering them? So that's really on top of mind. And finally, I call it a graduation plan. If I'm helping somebody, I want to make sure that I've got a graduation plan, meaning helping a person to move from the current situation to the next best situation. It could take a year for someone, it could take a day for somebody else. But always, always I think of, how can I, graduate this person from the current situation? If somebody is hungry, give them food, but not prepare a food delivery plan for the next year. Rather, how do we help that person to fend for himself or herself? So I always have a graduation plan when I go out and do things in the community. And throughout this, what I've seen is whether it's a refugee camp situation or people settling in a new country, in a new environment, people don't need so much of charity. What they need is inspiration. So if we have charity embedded with inspiration, I think we can make a big difference in people's lives. Perhaps I'll end up there and take some questions if there are any. So it's like I really spent more than almost over time, I think. So hopefully we'll have enough time for some questions and some discussions. So over to you, Michelle.
Thank you all.